Day 1 of SCGCON's regional championship over in Hartford just wrapped up, so let's take a look at what was in the room and what made day number 2. After the last few events, it should come as no surprise to see Izzet prowess way at the top of the metagame breakdown, but Azorius Omniscience picked up in steam, being the second most played deck in the room, followed by a pair of Jeskai decks, Oculus falling down, and Jeskai Control seeing some adjustment in numbers. The Zur Overlords or Domain deck kind of fell in representation, as well as the Mono Red Aggro deck, which fell from grace this weekend. Mono Black Demons picked up some steam, while Dimir Midrange stayed relatively the same. Orzhov Demons and Orzhov Pixie are the talk of the town now, while Esper Pixie is way down in people's opinion. The rest of the decks with 4 or more copies in the room range from Azorius Control, a couple of Gruul decks, including Gruul Delirium, which we'll talk about a little bit later, a Boros version of Mice, some Golgari Demons, the Boros Monument discarding its own cards, and an interesting take on Selesnya tokens. Meanwhile, a couple of fan-favorite archetypes are struggling to compete in Standard down at the 3 or less deck representation area, including Gruul Leyline, which was once the fastest deck in the West, is now way down there, as well as Abzan Pixie, no longer bouncing Rhinos, I guess is the favorable thing to do. A Dimir version of Demons rests down here next to the Azorius Artifacts deck that has also fallen deep down, including the Simic Terror deck, which you don't see nearly as much anymore, and Golgari takes on the Beanstalk deck. Wrapping it up on the bottom, though, are some hopefuls here. Jund Roots picking up 2 copies of the deck, and Timur Otters seemingly just struggling along with 2 representations in the room. Now, there were 33 other decks that were the singleton copies of their archetype in the room, but we'll cover those in our full metagame recap a little bit later on in the week. Moving on to what we're going to see day number 2, I hope you like Izzet prowess, because 92 of the decks converted for 27.5% conversion rate and are going to be making up 41.3% of the day 2 metagame, so just roughly under half of the room is going to be on the blue-red deck. Looking down at the other popular decks, Azorius Omniscience and Jeskai Oculus had roughly 20% conversion rates and are going to be making up just under 10% of the day 2 meta, while Dimir Midrange and Mono Red Aggro put in a decent amount of decks into day number 2, 38.9% for Dimir and 28.9% for the Mono Red deck. Gruul Delirium, despite only having 7 copies in the room, sent 4 of them over to day number 2, so 57.1%. We might see some of those on camera, especially early on in the day. And Gruul Mice, seemingly rising from the dead, 3 of the 7 copies making day number 2 for a 42.9% conversion rate, which would be very, very good if it wasn't for Timur Otters having the 2 copies making day number 2 for a 100% conversion rate. Now, some of the lesser played decks are also going to be seeing some play in day number 2, including things like Selesnya Auras, the Golgari Roots deck, an Abzan Poison deck, and the Jund version of Roots. So there's going to be a lot of interesting little one-of archetypes that we may wind up seeing on camera, especially a little bit early on in the day, especially because some of these decks had a 66.7% win rate going into the end of day number 1, which does put them in that top 10 win rate percentage, but they are still suffering a couple of losses. So if you want to see decks like this, you might want to tune in a little bit earlier to day 2 than later. Now, speaking of winning, let's look at the win rates for the top 15 presence decks in the room, and Izzet prowess is still rocking at almost 52% win rate all over, including 52.8% win rate in the non-mirror match head-to-heads, and still 52.2% when you subtract the ties from everything. Azorius Omniscience and Jeskai Oculus have fallen down quite a bit in the win rate category, as has Jeskai Control, and despite the win rate without ties going up a slight margin, it still doesn't really point to the Jeskai Control as being the one to play for the event. Zur Overlords is also down, as is Mono Black Demons and Orzhov Demons. However, the decks like Mono Red Aggro are up on the uprise right now, and Dimir Midrange is still rocking a very solid win rate, surprisingly alongside the decks of Gruul Delirium and Gruul Mice. So maybe pivoting away from some of those Jeskai colors and going into Gruul or Dimir might be the way to do things. Now, even when you factor out the number of decks in the room, there's still some familiar faces on just the overall top win rate decks in general, including that Gruul Delirium list, and the Dimir mid-range deck coming in at 15th. But overall, you can look at the singleton and duo copies all the way at the top: Jund Roots, Timur Otters, Abzan Poison, Golgari Roots, Rakdos Leyline, Selesnya Auras, and Timur Terror all tying at 66.7% win rate, while a couple copies of Selesnya Stompy, Boros Monument, Orzhov midrange, shout out to Bismon, Azorius Artifacts, the 4-color Zoo Craft deck, and Mono Green Stompy are also at the top of the tables in win rate. If you enjoyed this recap, stick around for my total event recap coming out in just a couple of days' time, where we'll go more in-depth on a lot of these archetypes and everything, as well as paying attention to my social media channels, and of course, tapping that subscribe button to stay up to date on everything I do here on YouTube. See you at the end of the event.